The discovery is completely unique. We have terracotta servants who could serve him.
They also find the head of the terracotta warriors. And the archaeological team came to this area and they start to dig.
For more than 2,000 years, the Terracotta Army has guarded Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, who sought to rule even beyond death.
This is an emperor who's obsessed with rediscovering lost knowledge. His ambition is to become, in life, like the god.
But in 2025, when advanced AI technology finally scanned his silent clay legions, what it uncovered stunned historians worldwide. Beneath the surface lay hidden details that could rewrite everything we know about his reign, his power, and his vision of immortality. The underground army of Qin Shi Huang. In the early spring of 1974, the dry farmlands outside the city of Xi'an in northern China were beginning to crack from drought.
The emperor conquered 6 kingdoms and unified China for the first time in history.
A few villagers from Xi'an decided to dig a new well in the hope of finding water. Among them was a farmer named Yang Jifa. He worked through the pale clay until about 15 feet down, his shovel struck something hard. At first he thought it was old roof tile or broken pottery. Then, a human-sized clay head rolled out of the pit. More fragments followed, a torso, pieces of armor, and bronze arrowheads glinting in the dust. None of them could have guessed that they had just cut into the roof of one of the most astonishing archaeological sites on Earth, a buried army that had slept untouched for more than 2,000 years. The farmers stacked the fragments near the edge of the field, and some of the bronze arrowheads were gathered to sell for a few coins. The discovery might have ended there if not for Zhao Kongmin, a local cultural official who heard rumors of strange statues near the well. He drove out to investigate, saw the clay figures, and instantly recognized that they were something extraordinary. Zhao began collecting every fragment he could find and notified the Shanxi Provincial Archaeological Institute. Within months, excavation teams arrived, and the scale of what they found forced China to construct an entire museum complex above the dig. The new buildings would shield the site from rain and the growing crowds of visitors who came to see it.
We're at the center, at the heart of this unbelievable World Heritage Site.
When the first pit was cleared enough to view, it looked like a silent battlefield frozen in time. Row after row of life-sized clay soldiers stood in formation, their heads lifted, armor sculpted in precise detail, as though waiting for a command that would never come. They faced east, the direction of the rival kingdoms the first emperor of China had conquered during the 3rd century BC, and behind them stood clay horses that once drew wooden war chariots. The chariot wood had long since rotted away, yet the ruts in the floor still marked where the wheels had rested. The scale defied imagination. Modern estimates place the total at more than 8,000 warriors, over 100 chariots, and hundreds of horses distributed across several buried pits. Only a fraction has been excavated. The largest chamber, known as Pit 1, measures about 755 feet long and a little more than 200 feet wide. Roughly 100 feet long and a little more than 100 feet wide, 153,000 square feet of floor space, covering about 3.5 acres, or more than 2 full football fields. The soldiers stand on a floor, set 16 feet below the ancient ground surface, and Pit 1 is only the beginning. Imagine a vast underground hall, divided into long aisles by thick earthen walls. Archaeologists describe 11 parallel corridors running east to west, their ceilings once formed of massive wooden beams topped with reed mats and layers of packed clay to keep out water. In its original state, Pit 1 would have felt like a roofed staging ground ready for deployment. At the eastern end stands a vanguard line of soldiers, the front attackers. Behind them, in the center, ranks of armored infantry hold long weapons. Along the sides and rear, troops turn outward to guard the flanks. It is laid out exactly the way a real army would prepare for combat. If Pit 1 is the grand show of strength, Pit 2 reveals strategy. It lies nearby and contains a true combined arms formation, different types of troops arranged to work together. Excavators found cavalry units complete with saddled horses, standing and kneeling archers caught mid-draw, and chariot crews positioned as if ready to fight from their horse-drawn carts. Recent counts in Pit 2 include several hundred warriors, roughly 100 horses, and multiple chariots divided into distinct sections like wings of an operating army. Some of the kneeling archers still bore faint traces of paint on their armor and footwear when they were first unearthed. Pit 3, smaller at about 5,600 square feet, holds far fewer figures, but plays a special role. It contains only a few dozen officers, and one chariot drawn by 4 horses, arranged as though inside a command post. Scholars interpret this chamber as the Army's headquarters, where senior commanders would have stood directing the forces arrayed in the larger pits. Pit 4, discovered later, was empty. An unfinished chamber suggesting the project might have still been underway when sealed. Unlike the others, Pit 3 shows minimal fire damage, and some of its pigments remain surprisingly vivid. Because of that preservation, it offers the clearest glimpse of how the entire army once looked in full color. Even after 50 years of excavation, the complex continues to reveal surprises. In late 2024 and early 2025, archaeologists working in Pit 2 uncovered a particularly elaborate officer figure, a life-sized senior commander standing near 2 chariots and several horses. His sculpted armor shows intricate patterns, and a tall, detailed headdress marks his rank. Chinese researchers said figures of such high status are extremely rare. Only about 10 top-tier commanders have been found since 1974. The way these figures were made is as astonishing as their number. Each warrior stands roughly between 5.5 and 6 feet tall and weighs several hundred pounds. They are hollow but strong. The legs were shaped like thick clay tubes, the torsos built separately as large shells. Arms, hands, and heads were crafted as individual pieces, then joined while the clay was still damp. Artisans smoothed the seams, sculpted facial features, and pressed fine details into the surface. Even fingernails, belt knots, and the stitching of armor plates were carved by hand. Analysis of the clay shows that it was not just ordinary soil. Scientists examining samples under microscopes identified a blend of local loess, a fine yellow silt common in northern China, mixed with minerals such as quartz and kaolin. Loess compacts easily and dries to a hard finish. Quartz adds grit and strength, while kaolin gives smoothness and plasticity. The mix was carefully prepared, likely in centralized workshops near the site, then distributed to production teams who shaped and assembled the figures. What emerged was not the work of one genius sculptor, but an industrial-scale operation managed by the state during the 3rd century BC. Traces of that system remain visible. Repetition in certain features, like the base forms of hands or heads, shows that molds were used for standardized parts. Yet after a molded piece came out, an artist would rework it individually. Those hand-finished touches ensured that no 2 warriors look exactly alike. When you stand in front of these figures, you see totally different jawlines, cheekbones, ears, hairlines, and even moods. Some faces look calm, some look tense. Some noses are straight, others are crooked. You can even spot lines pressed into lips that read like healed scars. To test whether that variety is just artistic flavor or based on real people, researchers have turned to high-resolution 3D scanning and machine learning. An AI model compares thousands of tiny measurements, like ear angle, chin depth, or the way one eyelid folds, and looks for patterns a human eye might miss. Teams ran detailed scans of warrior heads and found that the ear shapes and facial asymmetry are so specific that it's hard to believe they were invented from scratch. The working theory is that at least some of the higher-ranking figures, especially officers, may have been modeled on actual individuals who served under the first emperor. Differences in armor and clothing also signal rank and duty. Senior officers wear thick, layered breastplates and tall, ornamented headgear. Chariot drivers are modeled with protective caps and steady stances suited for holding reins. Cavalrymen wear shorter, tighter jackets designed for riding, and kneeling archers carry light armor allowing them to twist and shoot. Every posture corresponds to a real military role. The gray and brown tones visible today are what remain after paint and lacquer decayed. When excavators first lifted figures from the soil in the 1970s, they saw brilliant pigments still clinging to the surfaces. Deep reds from cinnabar, vivid blues and purples from copper-based minerals, fresh pink on the cheeks, black hairlines, even decorative motifs painted on the laces of armor. Among the pigments identified was Chinese purple, also known as Han purple, a synthetic barium copper silicate. It was an engineered compound, one of the earliest man-made purple pigments known anywhere in the world. Those colors sat atop a thin coating of lacquer, a natural resin drawn from the sap of the Asian lacquer tree. When applied and dried, lacquer forms a shiny glass-like seal, similar to clear varnish. Craftsmen first brushed lacquer onto the clay figures to create a smooth, moisture-proof surface, then painted the vivid pigments over it. The idea worked beautifully in antiquity, but caused disaster for modern archaeologists. Once exposed to air, the ancient lacquer dried and contracted, causing paint to flake off almost instantly. Researchers in the early excavations watched helplessly as bright colors vanished before their eyes, sometimes within 15 seconds of exposure. Within minutes, entire layers of pigment would crumble away. This forced teams to pause excavation and develop chemical stabilizers to preserve any remaining color. Today, conservators apply those treatments the moment new surfaces are uncovered to prevent the last traces of paint from disappearing. The weapons discovered alongside the soldiers complete the picture of a real fighting force. The clay figures once held functional arms, more than 40,000 bronze weapons in total, including swords, long spears, lances, halberds, dagger axes, crossbow mechanisms, and countless arrowheads. Bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, was the high-grade material of the era. The halberd, a pole weapon with a projecting blade, allowed soldiers to stab or hook opponents from a distance. Archaeologists found bundles of arrowheads carefully packed in groups of about 100. Chemical analysis showed that each bundle's composition was uniform within itself, but slightly different from the bundle beside it. Beyond the main army chambers, archaeologists have mapped a network of related pits scattered across the same farmland. Over hundreds of excavations, they have uncovered bronze chariots buried with real horses, pits containing suits of stone armor, and groups of clay attendants and officials. One pit even depicts entertainers, acrobats and strongmen modeled in motion, while another recreates a tranquil garden scene with bronze ducks, cranes, and swans arranged around what was once a streambed, accompanied by musicians. These findings reveal that the site was conceived not merely as a military display, but as a miniature version of the emperor's world, complete with civilians, performers, and animals. So if this is the army, who or what are they guarding? The answer is under a massive mound that may be the deadliest tomb ever built, inside the forbidden tomb of the first emperor. At the center of the entire site stands a huge earthen pyramid that looks peaceful from a distance but terrifying once you understand what hides beneath it.
He was buried in a tomb beneath a huge mound at the heart of the site.
The mound rises to about 249 feet, roughly the height of a 20-story building, and it seals the underground tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. Its base stretches for hundreds of feet in every direction, forming a wide, flat-topped pyramid surrounded by protective walls and ancient gate remains. Both old records and modern studies agree that work on this burial project began when Qin Shi Huang was still a teenager and continued for nearly 40 years, from around 246 BC to 208 BC. Historical accounts say as many as 700,000 people, laborers, artisans, and prisoners, were forced to dig, haul, and build the massive underground complex and the enormous mound that sealed it from the world. Excavations west of the main mausoleum area have turned up mass graves that archaeologists link to the workforce that built the site. In one grave pit alone, over 100 skeletons were recovered. Most were young or middle-aged men, many between about 15 and 40 years old. Their bones show hard physical stress. Studies of skull shape and ancient DNA suggest that these workers weren't all from one hometown. Some came from northern regions, some from far to the south, and some carried features not typical of the local Shanxi area at all. Later stories even claim that when the job was finished, some workers and even certain palace women were killed or buried nearby so they couldn't reveal what had been built. Scans and surveys show that the underground palace is not one room but a complete walled compound buried underground. Inside sits a brick perimeter wall about 13 feet high. That inner rectangle measures roughly 1,509 feet from north to south and about 1,280 feet from east to west. Outside, the brickwork stands a second wall of packed earth, 30 to 40 yards thick and tall, creating a shell that encases the core like armor. Sloping tunnels descend from each side toward the center. At the heart of it all rests the main burial chamber, about 262 feet long, 164 feet wide, and nearly 50 feet high. Its ceiling lies roughly 100 feet below today's ground surface. Signs of drains and what looks like an underground dam have also been detected, proof that the builders engineered defenses against flooding. This was no ordinary grave. It was constructed like a fortress. What makes this site extraordinary is that no one has ever opened that central burial chamber. The actual tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the chamber where his body and treasures are believed to rest, remains sealed exactly as it was more than 2,000 years ago. Archaeologists have excavated all around it, uncovering chariot pits, horse pits, and ruins of what appear to be palace foundations near the mound. They have found musicians, officials, and the outlines of entire courtyard buildings arranged like an afterlife version of the emperor's capital city. But the doorway into the core chamber has never been breached. Everything we know about what lies beneath the hill comes from ancient texts, ground-penetrating scans, and chemical readings of the surrounding soil and air. The oldest written account describing the tomb comes from the historian Sima Qian, who wrote in the 1st century BC, about 100 years after the emperor died in 210 BC. According to him, the underground chamber contained full-scale buildings, palaces and towers, filled with priceless artifacts and treasures. He claimed the interior of the tomb recreated the empire in miniature, with rivers and seas formed from flowing liquid mercury. The ceiling, he said, was painted with constellations and the stars of the night sky, while the floor below mapped the mountains and valleys of China. He described mechanical defenses, crossbows rigged to fire automatically at intruders, and lamps that burned indefinitely, made from the fat of a strange sea creature he called a manfish, possibly a whale. For centuries, scholars debated whether any of that was true or just legend. But modern science keeps finding eerie evidence that supports Sima Qian's words. One of the most unsettling details about this place is the mercury. Mercury is a silvery liquid metal that stays fluid at room temperature and releases poisonous vapor when it evaporates. Modern readings have confirmed Sima Qian's claim about rivers and seas of mercury inside the tomb, and the results are disturbingly accurate. Soil tests around the mound have revealed mercury levels way above what's normal in the area. In some samples, the dirt held about 1,440 parts per billion of mercury, and later surveys found hotspots above 1,200 parts per billion.
It survived the fall of the Qin dynasty, and it is still very much alive today.
For comparison, typical soil in that region usually measures in the few dozens to low hundreds of parts per billion. Scientists have even tested the air, using a laser-based system called differential absorption LiDAR, which can detect specific gases from a distance. They measured mercury vapor in the air above the mound at about 27 nanograms per cubic meter, compared with the regional average of 5 to 10. Those readings show that mercury is literally leaking from the hill right now, seeping upward through cracks despite the tomb being sealed. This contamination isn't from modern industry. The mercury levels follow the same pattern detected in earlier surveys decades apart, and the strongest concentrations align with where the main burial chamber is expected to sit. Studies tracing the source of the metal point toward ancient cinnabar mines, especially those in the region of Xunyang, which was under Qin control. Cinnabar, a bright red mineral made of mercury sulfide, was commonly refined to extract mercury. Researchers believe vast quantities of this ore were mined and purified for the emperor's burial, possibly exceeding 100 metric tons, more than 200,000 pounds of liquid metal. That would make the tomb's mercury content greater than most modern industrial spills. In ancient China, mercury wasn't just decoration, it was thought to possess life-giving energy. Alchemists in royal circles mixed it into medicines and potions meant to grant immortality. If the chamber truly holds channels of liquid mercury, then the trapped air inside is toxic. A single breach could release vapors that damage lungs and nervous systems within minutes. Opening the tomb without preparation could be lethal. Mercury is only part of the reason modern teams refuse to dig directly into the chamber. The other reason is preservation. A tomb that has been sealed for more than 2,000 years is its own contained world, with a unique balance of air, moisture, and pressure. Once that seal breaks, oxygen floods in, humidity changes, and fragile objects can collapse, fade, or rot in seconds.
That is the first emperor's tomb, into the center of what is thought to be the largest burial complex.
Conservators at the mausoleum have admitted that there is currently no technology capable of instantly stabilizing a space that large the moment it's opened. There is also the danger of traps and structural collapse. It might sound like a legend, but it's grounded in real engineering from that period. Sima Qian's account described automatic crossbows installed to shoot at intruders. Weapons from that era could easily kill at close range. While the wood and sinew that once powered them would have decayed, the bronze triggers and bolts could remain, jammed in the soil under immense pressure. Modern radar and magnetic scans have detected metal-dense zones and narrow corridors resembling choke points rather than open walkways, possibly designed to slow invaders and force them into confined paths. Even if the mechanical traps have long since failed, those corridors show intentional defense planning. And beyond any trap, the tomb's physical structure itself is a hazard. Ancient builders used massive wooden beams to support their ceilings. After 2,000 years buried under tons of soil, some beams may have rotted or weakened. A single wrong tunnel or vibration could cause parts of the chamber to cave in without warning. Another issue seldom discussed is water. The mound lies near the base of Mount Li, where groundwater sits roughly 100 feet below the surface. If someone were to drill through that system without fully understanding its layout, the result could be catastrophic. Mud and groundwater could rush in and destroy the interior in minutes. You've seen the kind of tomb he built. Now let's talk about the kind of mind that builds something like that. The mind of China's first emperor. In the 3rd century BC, what we now call China wasn't one country. It was a cage fight between 7 major states that had spent generations destroying each other. Cities fell and burned. Alliances flipped overnight. Assassins were routine, and survival depended on suspicion. Into that chaos stepped a boy named Yingzheng. He became king of the state of Qin when he was about 13. As he grew older, he did what no one before him had ever done.
It would be possible to completely wipe out the feudal lords, uniting the whole world.
He conquered every rival state, one after another, in a chain of brutal wars that ended in 221 BC. When the final enemy surrendered, he dropped the old title of king and created a new one for himself, Huangdi, meaning emperor. He declared himself Qin Shi Huang, meaning the first emperor of Qin, and from that moment on, there would be only one throne in the world, and it would belong to him. For him, winning the wars wasn't the real victory. Keeping what he had taken was. That meant absolute control, not only over soldiers and territory, but over thought, memory, money, time, and even language.
This is the Terracotta Army. 8,000 warriors buried over 2,000 years ago.
His state's name, Qin, is where the Western word China comes from. The label endured because his design for China endured. Even after his own dynasty collapsed, later rulers copied his model. One emperor above all, commanding a unified system that reached into every corner of the land. How do you hold a new empire together when yesterday it was 6 hostile kingdoms that all despised you? You erase their differences. Qin Shi Huang imposed one rulebook for everyone. Before him, each old kingdom had its own currency, its own system of weights and measures, even its own written forms of Chinese. He forced them into alignment. One coinage, one standard for measuring, one official script, one code of law. It might sound bureaucratic, but it was revolutionary. If every cart axle was the same width, then every cart would fit into the same ruts. If all the roads were the same width, armies and grain convoys could move anywhere without delay. Records say he ordered the roads to spread outward from the capital like spokes on a wheel, vast highways running in straight lines for miles so messengers and troops could race between provinces. And he was unflinching in how he ruled. Qin Shi Huang followed a system we now call legalism. Legalism assumes people aren't guided by kindness. They behave because the law frightens them more than disobedience tempts them. Under this model, the state writes clear, severe rules, posts them for all to see, and enforces them without mercy. Obedience earns reward. Defiance earns punishment. Nobles no longer inherited their offices. Governors were appointed by the central court and dismissed if they failed. The land was divided into commanderies and counties that reported directly to the throne. That ended the old feudal pattern where local warlords grew rich and broke away. About 8 years after unification, in 213 and 212 BC, his court began a campaign against what it called dangerous books and disloyal teachings. His chancellor, Li Si, argued that old writings about previous kings and rival states encouraged comparisons that could fuel rebellion. So works of history and philosophy that didn't match the official line were to be destroyed, except for copies sealed in the imperial archives. Texts on medicine and farming were spared because they were useful. Accounts from early historians say hundreds of scholars who protested were executed. The purpose was to control thought. If there is only one official past, then only one future can exist, and it belongs to him. Qin Shi Huang also promoted his own legend across the empire. Starting around 219 BC, he launched grand inspection tours of his new realm. He climbed sacred mountains, offered sacrifices like a god king, and left inscriptions carved in stone. The texts boasted that he had unified all under heaven, crushed rebels, fixed borders, and restored peace. After unification, he ordered a priceless piece of jade to be carved into the heirloom seal of the realm. Its inscription read, "Having received the mandate from heaven, may the emperor lead a long and prosperous life." The seal wasn't merely decoration, it was proof that heaven's right to rule had descended upon him and would pass to whoever possessed it next. Later dynasties fought over it for centuries, as if it were the soul of China itself. But for all his triumphs, there was one enemy he couldn't subdue: death. As the years passed, Qin Shi Huang became obsessed with immortality. To him, dying wasn't natural, it was defeat. Court magicians and alchemists told him of islands far across the eastern sea where immortal beings lived.
Two vast forces of equal size face each other, and the fate of China hangs in the balance.
One of them, Xu Fu, became central to the legend, an alchemist and sailor said to have led expeditions to find the elixir of life. Around 219 BC, the emperor sent Xu Fu with fleets, crews, artisans, and thousands of young men and women to bring the potion back. He returned only with stories. sea monsters, reclusive sages, and excuses that he needed more ships. On the second voyage, he vanished entirely. Some legends claim he reached another land, settled there, and called himself king. The emperor refused to give up. He summoned more masters of methods, early occult specialists, and drank every mixture they brewed. Many of their elixirs contained mercury. Today we know mercury is poison, attacking organs in the brain, causing tremors and paranoia. Historians now think those same immortality tonics helped kill him in 210 BC, when he collapsed during one of his inspection tours. He was only about 49. For all his control, his dynasty collapsed almost instantly after he died. When he passed, his death was kept secret. His top minister, Li Si, and the court eunuch Zhao Gao forged orders, suppressed the heir he seemed to favor, and installed a younger son they could manipulate. Within a few years, rebellions erupted across the empire. By 206 BC, the Qin dynasty was finished. From the day he crowned himself first emperor to the final uprising, his dynasty lasted barely 15 years. But it wasn't all for nothing. The next dynasty, the Han, kept the skeleton of his system intact. One emperor, one bureaucracy, one centralized authority stretching over vast distances. They preserved much of his law and his administrative grid because it worked. For nearly 2 millennia after him, Chinese governance followed his blueprint, a single throne presiding over all under heaven. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.